Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Chat, for inviting me. I think I'm given the most difficult, but then at the same time, most honorable jobs to try and sort of, together with our speakers and other moderators, to conclude today's sessions. The sessions today has given me a lot of insights. Coming from a social scientist sort of point of view, one thing in common in, I think, all of the presentations that we gone through today is all the artists or designer very successfully transform individual person I into we. I think we is exactly what a community is about. They may appear as a facilitator, in some case maybe as an observer, simply to demonstrate some of the art elements from the community. Some of them, like the last speakers from Malaysia, they call themselves social activists. So they assume different roles for themselves. But then what they actually did was they were more like the glue that gel every element in the community together. And that's really, really, highly appreciative. And I think I probably start off with a more way forward question since I'm the moderator. So I hope I have the privilege to ask this question. Okay, hi, Pascal. Please. Thank you. So I've been sort of, I've attended all these presentations, and I have a very big question in mind. It's, what exactly are we, or the artist or the designer, are creating or recreating in the community? Is it actually the community that we're recreating? When I sit through the whole afternoon, I'm thinking these experts or artists are creating or recreating something in the community, of the community, at the same time for the community. I think that three different tiers that sort of bonds the interests for the community together is very unique in each of the different cases. So my question, maybe if I may start with our keynote speakers, is what do you think was that you have actually helped create or recreate for the community in your project?
Well, I think that these projects, they work at different levels. No? They work individually with the person who's involved in it. So for the weavers, being part of this project has actually made a difference in their lives. We have sold now around 15,000 lamps, which for our scale is quite a bit. For the weavers is quite a bit as well. It makes a difference. For the plastic bottles means nothing, for example. No, so it's all about the scale, as we had the question there. But I think that also the project has a lot to do with storytelling. Yes. So it's not just about the product, but about spreading the message, and then it actually can reach much wider public. So that community actually spreads worldwide, no, which is what's happening. What I talked about the Aborigines communities, for example, that they spread their problems and they gain the dignity of their Australia, of the rest of Australia through their paintings. No, so in a way, I think that their work is giving back their dignity to these communities.
Can I have a follow-up questions by twisting the question a little bit? What did the project create or recreate for yourself or for your team?
For me, well, I think I came from a strict industrial design education in a way, which now belongs to another period, actually. The crisis broke down all of the basis of how products were made before. I think that now people are looking for more soul in the products, for a slower way of making. Not so much about the scale, but about the opposite. I think that now there are like a few big players in the market. Google, Facebook, all of these mega mega communicators, as well as there are these mega factories such as IKEA or some. So those, they take the big part of the market, and there's no way smaller creative people can actually enter that market. So our way to find a gap in our work, in our profession, is actually through these very, very small, not working with industry necessarily, or working with industry but in a crafts way, which is something which technology now allows you. It allows you to arrive to extra precise quality, making one-offs nearly, no? And that's very much to do with crafts. So when you bundle all of these elements together, you can get a different way of approaching what a product is.
Great. So on the same set of questions, I would like to invite, any artist or any designer would like to, make a remarks. Yes, Priscilla.
Well, I've worked with a lot of communities, and the project that I showed today in Mito, at the end of the project, I came back at the end of the exhibition, and I really felt that the women had created the kind of community that I want to be part of. So I think, for me, initiating the worker cooperative, and it was really important for me to be part of a community like that myself.
Well, I was very touched, actually, at the end when you made the statement, think locally and act globally. It's, if I may say, a great political slogan, because it's so grounded and so specific, and yet this whole point about storytelling, witnessing, giving voice to experience to make invisible visible, is also to educate those who are not aware. They're in ignorance. They sometimes don't even care because of all the soundbite rubbish we get. And that is one of the ways that those practices bubble, emerge, and blister into a different kind of discourse, if I can use that word. So I think that's been a really important aspect for this afternoon. And I've learned a great deal. For example, it took me back to some period of my life when I lived behind the Iron Curtain. And you also had to have licenses to perform. And yet what was generated was the most extraordinary physical theatre in all sorts of spaces because you couldn't use language. And it was a wonderful trickster game. And it seems to me that one of the other things that argues against evaluative, quantitative statistics, which technology can also crunch for you very well, is to write so many pages of the stories that people have told you that they only read the first page because they're so exhausted by those voices of experience that have ruptured the bureaucratic system.
Thank you very much. Shall I open the question to the floor? Anyone from the audience would like to ask questions or share your comments? Yes, please.
I have been thinking about this capitalism because our society is really controlled by it recently. Of course, before that, we had the war capitalism with East India Company and all these colonial expansion and everything. And so I think we are at the sort of defining new age for our own kind of capitalism. Well, I always think about currencies because we are always thinking about the bottom line in capitalism. So that's sort of a dead end. And I have been, in my own work, trying to define currencies. So there's, concrete currency and tangible and intangible currencies. And so it goes to, I think in the end, the bottom line for us is really what is the value we're getting? Balancing this two different kind of, it's a balancing act actually. And in that, we have a sort of a power to determine what the currencies are in a way. So I saw all the projects you have spoken about, and I was calculating in my mind what I would put, in tangible currencies, and how can you fund these problems. And sometimes funding agency or funding institution have own agenda. They have their own tangible and intangible currencies they are playing with. And so we have lots of negotiating to do, but I think we have to, all of ourselves, always determine the currencies. It's kind of Bitcoin thing, but it's our own sort of art is really a great medium for that, because art can be billions of dollars, art can be nothing, But so I think we're gathered together here, but I think the value of our society is at the core of this discussion. So what do we value? So that comes back to ourselves. How do we want to live our lives? What is the standard we want to live by? It's not given by the government. It's not given by the books. It's not. So I think we are very lucky, I think, people who are here, because we're artists. We have creative thinking. We're innovating as something all the time. And Junichi Arai's exhibition, I think, inspires me to think about that again, how he struggled, all these different phases in his life. In the end, he wasn't a billionaire, but I think he had gave us a lot of intangible currencies that you cannot buy. I think that's the strength of our society, our artist community. And I'm always going for things that you cannot buy with money, because that's the most power you have.
Thank you very much. That's exactly, thank you very much. I think that was very, very nicely put. That's exactly the types of answer that I would look forward to when I ask, what are we actually creating or recreating for the community? Is the value, or is the way we trying to rebuild our social norms and social systems and social values? I think that is very provoking and profound, very important. So, yes, we have one hand.
Yoshiko just said, and one question that actually I found really interesting from him before, when at the end of the other talk, when he asked, how do you measure this thing from an institution, which I think it's the biggest struggle. I mean, of course, what Yoshiko said, I think we're all, that it warms our hearts, and like, of course, we all agree on that. But then we also work within organizations, we work for funding institutions, so how do we, as from that same perspective that Yoshiko is talking about, how do we sort of convince those institutions, convince the governments that we have around us, convince the funding bodies that allow us to do our work, that the work that we do sometimes is not tangible, that the work that we do sometimes doesn't produce money, it doesn't produce huge numbers of visitors, that sometimes it requires a lot of time to actually get to where we want. And like, of course, I mean, I think all of the projects that we've seen today are so special because of that, because none of them are based on the numbers or on how much money they produce or how much visitors they can bring to a place, but on the fact that it's all humans working at doing things that we want our lives to be and that we want our communities to be. So I guess that's one of the most difficult and challenging questions in these kinds of arenas, is how do we translate that to the funding hands that are allowing us to do our work?
How are we going to translate all this into the language that these people can understand, right? So any answers to this very tough questions? Yes? I know, same.
Hi, thank you very much. So insightful presentations. I'm so happy to have you again here. And in responding to Power's questions, of course, there is the crucial way and method to change the stakeholders, the ideas in one actions. So it takes a long time, and I don't know if it's the right terminology to say educate, but empowers and to kind of to introduce an alternative way of looking at the world and the alternative way of evaluations. For instance, like punk rock slap, I'm really impressed that they changed the banner, political banner, and so using the value of aesthetics. Yeah, that is the power of art, right? So it's multiple ways to change the ideas, right? That's introduced way to communicate. So every occasions, even we think it's difficult to overcome, but we should take that opportunity to communicate with, connect to them, to draw attentions. I don't have any right answer but so that's the kind of, therefore we have to exchange in the media and exchange the ideas and to share the knowledge like this time. So yeah, so I'm so happy to today we learned a lot, and also we need to unlearn. Sometimes we have to abandon what we take it for granted. So yeah, sorry, there's no answer, sharp answer, but that's what I want to respond to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, I hold the view at the moment because, as you know, I come from a country whose contested values are fragmenting what seemingly was a united Ireland. Actually, that is not the case. But the crisis is not just an economic one. It's a battle for ideas, and it's a battle for culture, and it's significantly a battle for values. Now, in some way, we all have to work with a small p, which means that one has to, I love the word dialogic. It's trying to get people into a conversation, because sometimes that's hard. People don't always want to open up, but sometimes you're having to address fears, anxieties, differences, all sorts of things. But if you can get into a dialogue, it's possible to then shift value systems. But that is the work of quite intense labor, which often isn't recognized, but has to be done. But we do have a crisis, definitely, in value systems and what we think is important.
Okay, thank you. Chin Chin?
I actually come from the world of the evil capitalism. Because before I joined Chat, I was an investment banker. So you might want to shoot me now. But I think we have to think of funding bodies as also communities that are made up of people and human beings that want to hear a convincing story. And sometimes that story may sound like it's only numbers, but very often the person you're pitching to, your community project, has to be also interpreted in a way that can resonate with that funding person's heart. So don't think of the funding body as a machine. They are just as human as we are, so I'm here to prove it. But anyway, I think, yeah, funding is always something we think about. It's challenging. Do they think differently from us? Or they don't care about community building. They only care about the dollars. But I think the world is changing, and I think I'm optimistic about that. Yeah.
I have.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Can I? Because I've been thinking about the economy a lot. I'm even considering doing an MBA at MIT. But I started to think, because we always see the economy as our enemy, but I think if we could start to see the economy as a cultural space and as a social space, maybe then we can take back a bit of the power that we give now to the economy, because it's ours. We are creating the economy. It's not an enemy. It's not external to us. So I think it's really important Because we are cultural, we are social, we are political. So if we approach the economic system not as something foreign to us, but as something that's ours and that we can occupy in a cultural and social way, then I think we have an incredible power, because there's an enormous amount of abundance in a few people's hands.
Actually, I found the question very interesting about how to convince, because that's only thing that we have to think about it. But I can tell the example for like the project we work with the Asia Center. So the project I introduced about the film festival, actually, normally the funding was for us. And if we take the funding and if we organize things, it's quite easy. But we don't like to do that, because I think the logic of funding is that if we are the one that they believe and they put the money for it, but maybe some other can do it better. But they cannot convince. So we try to make the things that we try to be, we try to, let the funding for other to do things. Things look easy, right? But actually it's not easy, because we can understand, the funding body can understand it in the art way, culture way, but in the financial way is a big problem, because they just give money for us and another people will write the receipt or whatever. So I think it's very difficult for us to convince them. And I agree with you that thing changed now, and we can convince. And the one who make us in difficult is not the funding body, but the artist. Very difficult to work with them. And then we found, terrible. Next time we have to think very much about that. So that is my story, my real true story.
Marianne.
I think you have to seize the moment where you can influence. And at the moment, in Liverpool, we've been talking a lot about a city for artists, because it's very easy to have a city for art and culture and leisure and tourism, and then artists are the ones that get pushed to the outskirts, and it feels there's maybe been a breaking through moment, and you can sometimes feel like you're talking to yourself, but if you actually, you can break through basically with something that you believe in, and also people start to understand there's a risk if you lose creative practitioners. So you have a responsibility if you have a platform to take that opportunity. So I think, again, in that kind of hopeful way, kind of collectiveness and platforms, and not being frightened to speak at a point where funding feels under threat. I think the more people do that, then the more that will be taken on board.
Okay, thank you very much. Afro?
What I think that when creative people, or I don't know, artists, designers, we approach a community to do a project, I think we should think that we're very responsible for what's going to happen, and we need to feel that there's going to be a continuity in that project, that there's going to be carry on, that money which is being invested in us to run the project in a community is not just going to stay there, but it's going to generate more money. Because the worst thing that we can do is actually create expectations, then leave, and then left the project alone. We're just going to die, and it's going to be even worse than if we had not gone before. No? So I think that in that way, having money for us to develop the project is great, because if not, we wouldn't be able to. But then we should be responsible to create the right structure there to keep it going once we go.
Yes, agree.
That's our...
Agree entirely. Yes, I think nowadays I work personally at my full-time jobs at the University of Hong Kong. I work quite closely with donors and funding bodies. Yes, universities around the world do have to rely pretty much on donations and foundations and stuff. One thing that I sort of trying to break through my mind and heart when I have to communicate with the donors is, some of them, when they ask you tough questions, it's good for the project, because it really lets you think in depth what exactly are you creating? What kind of impact are you expecting? And how are you going to sustain the impact? When we talked about impact, it's not about the scale as such, small or big it's not like that. It's how the impacts or how the goodies coming from the project can be sustainable. Even there's one day the donor's not going to invest into the project anymore. I think that's a very important question for all of the curators or designers to think about. And then I do agree a lot with Chin because we have new concept, share valued, inclusive business. A lot of the private sectors, they don't think like they used to be, like giving out money as if it's a charity. They feel like they are co-creating something with the partners. So I think that is pretty promising when we're looking into the future. So I am told that we have 5 more minutes. So any other concluding remarks or comments from the audience? Yes, please.
Well, about the funding, a few things I have done, World Support Network and Slow Fiber Studios, both we decided, mainly and then with other like-minded people like Edith here, we work to do what we believe in. And we don't wait for a funding agency or a big institution to give us money. And now we have internet, we have membership, we have, WeChat or whatever. The power of those media is incredible. And I think that community without borders in terms of countries or languages even is huge now. So we can create and communicate beyond what we have never imagined before, and which empowers us in a way. And also another thing is what I have experienced. And many times I had to put myself financially in line to do so many projects. But because I believe in the goal and what we try to do, I don't hesitate. If I lose something, it's a gain in a way for me. If we are able to do it, then what happens is that people come forward, institution come forward. If you don't have the space, money to rent the space, we'll offer this. We'll offer this kind of partnership, which opens incredible doors and more connections. And in the end, I always feel if we had all the money we wanted to rent and do things properly, we could never have done things that it's almost like handmade, made by heart and hand, which you cannot buy with money.
Thank you very much. I think with that lovely, is it one more question?
A bit kind of joining Paula and Chin, and then you're talking about this, the method. It's great now. The founders, it's very interested. This kind of more the smaller scale and another project, which is also in line with what Alubalo was talking about. But there's a lot of copycats. It was really interesting about the other group who copied their project, and then it's also who has got this mega money. They're really into this part of activities. And then they can copy, then not with heart and without love and engagement, because that's a kind of, you guys are really definitely in one way creating we don't want to really see as a trend, but it is as the consequence of this big global economy. So this is getting reading the mind of design and art, what we can communicate, but it also have to be a little bit fine balance, because it's the big company, they can just take social project as big commercial project. So I think therefore it's also Pascal also said it's very important. It's still really have to kind of find this balance with the real economy and this project, how we can kind of coexist, I think.
Thank you very much. I think it's also important not only to find the balance with the economy, but also with the environment. I'm actually very, very pleased that most of the project also touch upon natural resources, wildlife conservations, and sort of I think most of the speakers expand the word community to include non-human species like Homo sapiens. So I think that that was also a wonderful sort of interpretation on demonstrating the community. So if there's no more other questions or comments, so may I have the privilege to... Oh, okay. Yes.
Okay, I was just in doubt to react because it's coming back into my presentation tomorrow. The only thing I want to say is that I strongly believe we are talking about including society, but I think it's also important to include our sponsors and to attract them and to convince them. Because they're not all bad.
They're part of the family.
Out of the family, and also to expand not only to our cultural activities, because I think it's also important to be part of society, become part of economy, become part of the social system. I think that's really important to get more funding, because then all people are convinced that we are doing the good thing. I'll come back.
Thank you very much. You have a last comment?
I just want to comment on that. I don't think anyone was suggesting that we're anti-diversity of funding in the dialogic encounter. I think it is to do with what you were saying about the old systems, the large systems, the Google systems, which some of the students go and work for and they leave in half an hour, to set up their own concerns. And Google will support them because they know they will come up with the most interesting ideas. I think it's a different ecosystem that we're thinking of now, which is more nuanced, more complex, and needs different kinds of conversations in that dialogic manner, because that old bureaucracy has gone.
Look at us here.
We're all old. Yes.
Yeah.
We haven't got the...
Well, if I may sort of have two concluding remarks on this note. I think it's very important when we look at community, we look at not just inter, but intra-generation. So when we talked about community, it's not just two-dimensional, not even three-dimensional, but actually it's four-dimensional communities we're dealing with here. And then I think that the beauty of all the presentations that we've attended to today, they're very successful. Whether we have a KPIs or evaluation system or not, it's very visible to all of the audience that they did something right. And that something right is they involve the local community, and at the same time, they empower them. Not just empowering the community, but at the same time, empowering themselves. And I think that that kind of interactive, interwoven process is beautiful. And so at this note, I would like to thank the organizer, and I hope we all have a very enjoyable afternoon. And I'll pass the microphone and stage to our Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.